be sure to contact me directly at the email address listed at the bottom of the screen here. That's webinars@iggsoftware.com. I'd be happy to provide you with a recording or to provide you with additional information for whatever you need. I'm an active member on the support team, so if you do have any lingering issues, please feel free to contact us at our live chat support. And if you really need to talk with me, maybe because we've been chatting together through the webinars, that'd be perfectly fine. You can just request me if I am available. And I'd be happy to assist anybody who needs it. So why don't we jump into this? We have Ben asking a great question. He says, are you uploading the webinars to YouTube? There are a couple webinars already posted to YouTube. This webinar in particular is not yet posted to YouTube. Hoping to get a nice solid recording of that today. And then we'll post that to YouTube. And as well, we will be posting the webinars as they go live directly on our website. So we can sort of circumvent users that are not able to attend the session or the webinar session. So if you do have any other questions, please feel free to ask them throughout the presentation. I'll do my best to answer them accordingly. But if it's off topic or if it's something unrelated to what we're discussing, try to save it for the end. There will be a dedicated question and answers time slot at the end. So I'd be happy to address anything else you might have at that time. But why don't we just jump into things? So again, today is going to be the Managing Credit Card Debt Using Envelope Budgeting webinar. And this is an important webinar because a lot of people have some outstanding credit card debt and even just other debt, mortgages, car loans, etc. But today we're going to be focused mainly on credit card debt. Some of the tips and tricks can be used to sort of pay down other debts as well. But credit card debt is really going to be our focus of today. And I'd like to share this quote that I found at the bottom of this slide. I wasn't able to find the source of the quote, but I'm sure it's been handed down and passed along through the ages and seen a bunch of different variations. But essentially, the variant that I have, it says, interest is the penalty you pay to own something that you cannot afford right now. And that's a great way to look at debt and interest in particular, because debt can be a great tool, or taking on extra debt can be a great tool in growing a business or growing even just in your personal life, whether that be taking on a house or taking on additional credit card debt to maybe pay some medical bills. Sometimes it's just something we can't avoid. So I like to include that quote just to sort of give some context on the issue and before we move on. For some more context, I like to include this as well. You'll see at the top of the graphic, roughly $16,000 is the average U.S. household credit card debt amount. So the average U.S. household owes about $16,000 in credit card debt, and this is a huge figure. This is a very, very troublesome, and the reason why I like to include this in the presentation is so users understand that they're not alone in this case. A lot of times people can feel shame from certain debt, especially credit card debt, and you can feel like it's basically a mountain that you can't climb. We want you to understand that while being in debt is obviously stressful and troublesome, we want to make sure that you understand there are options. You can sort of build your way out of debt, but it's going to take some sacrifice and it's going to take some planning and a lot of work, frankly. But we're hoping that sort of these tools and these tips and tricks can help you make better decisions moving forward and better track these credit card payments. So a few things we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to just talk a little bit about getting started, just what to do before you really jump into Banktivity, just to kind of get an idea of really what you need and what information you need going forward. Talk about a couple of strategies, and then we're going to discuss the example, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in the demo that we have scheduled for a little later. So getting started, the first thing you're going to want to do, and this is even outside of Banktivity, go ahead and write down all of the credit cards that you have, whether it's one credit card, 2 credit cards, 5, 10 maybe. Go ahead and write down all of the credit card accounts, write down all their balances, and write down their interest rates. Once you have all that information, it might be a good idea to go ahead and add them into Banktivity. Again, we'll be covering Banktivity 6 for Mac today. I'll be showing you how to do all this in Banktivity 6 for Mac. So go ahead and add the accounts into Banktivity. It's also important to make sure that you freeze spending whenever possible. The example that we're going to be covering today will be an example where the user is actually actively using the card, so the card is going to remain open. But it is always a good idea to freeze spending whenever you can. For instance, if you have the $5 for the Starbucks or the $5 for the local coffee shop coffee that you get every morning, instead of throwing it on your credit card, which that $5 can turn into $15 over the course of 6 months, for instance, it might be best to just pay with cash. If you have it on you, just go ahead and pay with cash. Save that extra $5 from going onto your credit card account, and then just sort of make these little sacrifices here and there whenever you can. And my second, or my first little bullet point or sub point underneath that is, it's typically best to keep the credit card account open with the credit card company, but no longer use it. Like I said, we're going to be covering an example with an active card, so obviously that user wouldn't be closing their account, or I wouldn't be closing my account specifically. But if you're in a situation where you won't be using that card actively, it's still best to keep the account open, but just not use it. And this is because when you close a credit card account with a credit card company, obviously you still owe the balance. So that's not like it's going to go away just from closing the account. But what no longer will happen is they will no longer be reporting to your credit score. So it could actually negatively affect your credit score. So it would be best in these cases to keep the card open, and then that way your credit report is updated periodically with indication that you are indeed paying your bill. So typically best to keep the card open but no longer use it. And a little tip at the bottom that I have here, it just says add potentially relevant information to the pop-up inspector fields of the credit card accounts by double clicking on them in the sidebar. And I can actually show you how to do that in just a moment. So a couple of the strategies that I want to talk about. There's 2 main strategies when it comes to managing and paying off credit card debt. The first is called the debt avalanche method. And this is typically the most recommended by sort of finance professionals. But then the second download method, or excuse me, the second strategy that I want to talk about is called the debt snowball method. So first, we're going to start with the debt avalanche method. And then this is basically where you have all of your accounts listed and you pay down the credit card account with the highest interest rate first, regardless of the balance. And this is because interest can really kill you, especially in the long run. You might not even be treading water if you're not paying off the highest interest rate. So if one of your credit cards has an outrageous interest rate, make sure you pay that balance first, because that can really help to free up some cash flow in the long run. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to get get that high interest rate out of the way, and then you can focus on the smaller rates, and then you don't feel like you're trying to swim upstream as much, so to speak. And this is the most recommended because it makes the most sense logically, but it also can be the hardest one to sort of follow through with and just stay disciplined with. And the reason for that is I'm gonna touch upon that when I talk about the debt snowball method. And the debt snowball method is where you pay the lowest balance first. And the reason for this, you sort of get some small victories in order to build momentum and then continue to pay off your debts for the other cards. So let's say you have a credit card account with $600 debt balance, but the other ones have 2,000 plus debt balances. You're going to want to, using the debt snowball method, you're going to want to pay the lowest balance first. This will allow you to free up the cash flow after you pay it off so you can apply it to the other payments for the other credit card accounts. And then that also helps to sort of give you a little bit of not inspiration, but it'll help you stick to the strategy, and it'll help you move forward with a little bit more cash flow, so you can sort of take on those other little more intimidating debts as well. And we actually have a great Personal Finance 101 article that covers this topic. And I'm going to open that up right now. And you can find this just by going to our website. Go to the Learn tab at the top of the website, and then click on Personal Finance 101. And there's actually a bunch of great articles that have been written by Ian, the president of the company. So he's really hands-on, as well as John Redfield. He manages our media department. He's a great guy. They both have a bunch of great insight. So I'd strongly recommend you take a look at these and sort of make yourself more familiar with this page, because there's a lot of great ideas and great tips in this. For instance, how zero-based budgeting works and why you need it. And then here's the paying off credit card debt using the debt snowball method. And a lot of great information, as well as an example, a graphic, etc. So there's a lot of great info in there. All right, so I was just reviewing the questions list. So C says, a long time ago, I was denied a small credit at 47th Street Photo because I had too much available credit, although it was all zero balance. So yeah, the credit card companies, credit in general, it's a very, very helpful tool, especially in personal and business growth. But taking on extra debt is a risk for everybody involved. So the risk assessments don't always go our way, even if there's really no outstanding debt. So it can be a little tricky at times. So that's an interesting thing that happens. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. So let's go back to the presentation. I just wanted to bring that up so you sort of navigate there and read that article. But out of these two strategies, you're going to want to make sure that you pick a strategy and stick to it. It's really important that you stay disciplined in continually paying off this debt. Over time, you'll see that the debt starts to melt away as long as you are using the card as infrequently as possible. Making sure you curb your spending is one of the biggest parts of managing credit card debt. So the example that we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about a user with a single credit card account with a balance of negative $5,000. So they owe this credit card account company $5,000 in previous debt. And then we have a checking account balance of $1,000, and this is what we're going to use to budget for these payments and other expenses as well moving forward. The minimum payment on the credit card account is $200 a month as an example, but we want to be aggressive when we pay this down, so we're going to make it up to $300 a month. And again, in our example, the user is going to be using the card occasionally to make purchases, and for my example, I will be using the card for groceries. And then another tip I have at the bottom listed says use scheduled transactions to make payment splits easier and save time. And what I mean by payment splits, you'll see in a few minutes. I'm going to show you an example of what this is going to look like and how to easily just create a scheduled transaction based on that information. So without any further ado, I don't want you guys to have to listen to me talk at you the whole time. I want to show you some items. So let's jump right into the demo. And you'll see here is a pretty basic scheduled transaction, or a pretty basic summary view. We have two accounts listed, nothing crazy going on. Just a second here. I'm going to check to see if there are any other questions. All right, so I'm not seeing anything. Just gonna jump right into everything. I want to make sure that I answered all the questions before we move any further. So you should be able to see my screen still. Now let's move to creating the budget. But before we create the budget, what we're going to need to do is create 2 new custom categories. And this will be apparent as to why I'm doing this in a few minutes, but basically these will be used so we can budget for the credit card payment as well as the split balancer that we will be using. So I'm just going to go to the settings icon, click on categories, and then you'll see this is the complete list of categories that we have. We're going to create 2 new ones. So first, the category name is going to be CC Debt Pay Down. Pretty straightforward. This is just going to be used, let's actually use payment, make it a little easier to understand. So CC Debt Payment. This is basically just the category we're going to use to track the credit card payments. We don't want it to have a parent type of is expense. That's exactly what we want. Used to track budget for credit card payments. You can enter the description if you want. It's completely optional. It doesn't really have any effect on this. And then you can even add a custom category icon if you would like. Let's give it that one. You can enter your own if you would like as well. But let's just give it this one and then just select add category. So you'll see CC Debt Payment here. So now let's do the balancer, CC Payment Balancer. And there's really only one time that this, or not one time, but one area where this category comes into play. One, you're going to have to exclude this category from the budget, and you'll see why in a few moments. But the other time is this category is going to be used to essentially balance the split payment for the credit card transaction payment. We're going to want it to be an income category because it's going to be an income amount within the transaction. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select add category. So you'll see these are our 2 new categories, CC Debt Payment, CC Payment Balancer. The CC just stands for credit card, if you were wondering. So let's go ahead and create the budget now. So you're just going to go to the tool icon at the top left, and I'm going to select add budget. And for those of you who were able to attend the budgeting webinar, you probably remember this portion. If not, I'll touch upon it briefly. But basically, there's 2 different budgeted items. There's scheduled items and unscheduled items. Scheduled items are basically items where you know the specific frequency of. So like rent, your paychecks, your utilities bills, your gas bill, telephone, cellular bill, etc. So these are going to be items you know the specific frequency of. The unscheduled items are items you don't necessarily know the frequency of, but you know generally the amount that you're going to need to budget for those items. And the best example in this case would be groceries. For instance, you don't know when you're going to the grocery store specifically. You might try to go every Monday or Tuesday, etc. But you know the general amount. So I'm just going to do Joe's credit card budget. Well, excuse me. In this case, we're going to want to make sure that we include all accounts. So we'll just go ahead and select use all accounts in this case. And then again, this is because we're going to want to track and budget for the items that occur in the checking account, as well as we're going to want to track and budget for items that occur in the credit card account. Because again, this card is still active, even though we're trying to use it as little as possible. So we're going to select use all accounts. And now it's going to ask us if we want to use all the categories. Normally, I would say yes, use all the categories, because you want to make sure that all the transactions that are incurred in your accounts are actually being reported on in the budget. But in this case, there's one category we need to exclude. That is the CC Payment Balancer category. And this is because there will be an amount associated with this category, but it is essentially just a balancing amount. So we don't want this to actually appear in our budget. Otherwise, it'll show up as it'll show up as budgeted income, which we do not want to we do not want to happen because it's not really income. It's just a balancing amount. So I'm just going to exclude that one. Everyone else can be included. So now it's where we get to the budget setup process. So I'm just going to go ahead and select IGG software as the payee. This is going to be me setting up my paychecks or wages, basically just my paycheck transaction. So let's say $1,000 goes into my paychecks and wages category. The first of the month was a Friday, and it's going to be every 2 weeks. And then it's going to go into my checking, and it'll be a type deposit transaction. Nothing crazy, pretty straightforward, done. Then we're going to be done with income after that. And now we're going to add a bill. So let's go ahead. We'll add my rent. Let's say $500. Whoops, that was the payee field. So let's say North End Rentals, $500 going to the category of rent. Rent was due on the first of the month, pretty typical. Every month, account type, checking, check transaction. Great, done with this bill. Now let's set up another bill. Let's do bill, Verizon Wireless. Let's keep it nice and simple. $100, telephone and cellular, first of the month, checking account, boom. And now we're going to set up an expense. So this is a non-scheduled item. So we're going to click plus, add an expense, $400 every month, and this is going to be for groceries. You'll notice here it says there was no activity in groceries during the previous month. If there had been, Banktivity would provide a suggestion for the amount based on the previous activity for the previous period. Since there were no transactions in these accounts, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to go ahead and click done with this expense. And then I'm actually going to add another item to the budget. And you can actually do this either way, but I'm going to add it as an expense first. So let's say $300. And this is going to be for the CC debt payment category. Remember, we want to pay down $300 a month because we're trying to be aggressive on the pay down schedule. Instead of the minimum payment of $200, we're going to enter $300 as the payment amount. So we're just going to use the CC debt payment. This is the custom category that we had set up previously. And I'm just going to click done. Now we're going to want to make sure, double check these items, make sure they're appearing correctly. CC debt payment, groceries, North End Rentals, 500, and Verizon Wireless for 100. So everything looks correct in the screen. I'm just going to go ahead and click done. And then I'm going to go to set up envelopes. So this is where we're going to be asked to put the money in the envelopes. And again, for those who were at the budgeting or the webinar the budgeting webinar, I suggested to make sure that you prioritize the envelopes. So the envelopes with the highest priority get the money in them first. So for me, in my case, that would be rent. Need to make sure that I have enough money for rent. And then the money that we're basically using to distribute all this is the money that is cash on hand. This is basically just the checking account balance that appears on the sidebar. If you have multiple accounts, obviously you would see a different figure for cash on hand. But this is basically just the total positive balance for these types of accounts. I'm going to ignore the $5,000 debt that we have on the credit card account because that's something we're trying to pay down. So we need to use this cash in order to do so. But I also have other debt or other bills that I need to be paying as well. So we're going to go ahead and select rent for $500, and you'll see the total distributed appears up here at the top. And again, I need to make sure that my telephone bill gets paid. Otherwise, I won't be able to contact my family or contact work. And then I'm going to want to make sure that I have enough money for the CC debt payment because I want to get ahead of that bill and I want to stay ahead of it if I can. Because again, I'm being aggressive on that pay down. And then the groceries category. So you'll see here the total distributed is equal to $900, and then the cash on hand is $1,000. That really only leaves us with $1,000 to play with, or excuse me, $100 to distribute to this category. I have a fridge full of food. I got some cabinets with food in them, so I'm not too worried about my groceries for the month. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that remaining $100 into the groceries, and then just click done. And what that's going to do is just going to create the budget for us automatically. It's going to show us what we have budgeted for so far, what our actual amount is, and since there actually haven't been any transactions associated with any of these categories, you're not going to see anything in actual. But you'll see down here the budgeted amounts appear properly. The actual amounts appear properly because we haven't had transactions. And now the envelope amounts appear properly as well. This just means that we have already assigned $300 to be set aside for these transactions. Excuse me. I just clicked on the item. You can click on items within the budget to get a little bit more info, but I just clicked it by accident. You'll notice over here also that the diamonds appear in these categories, but not the top two. This is because the rent, the telephone and cellular, and the paychecks and wages, those are all scheduled budget items. So these diamonds indicate the date at which those items are supposed to be scheduled for. So these are for the first of the month. Rent was first of the month. Telephone and cellular, first of the month. Same with paychecks and wages, but this was scheduled for every 2 weeks. So first of the month, and then 2 weeks later, then 2 weeks later again will be that last diamond. So this is all appearing correctly, and why don't we go ahead and sort of post a couple of transactions just so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and just post all of these. Just going to do it directly from this screen. Just going to click done, and then now you'll see that, okay, all right, so since the first already happened, I definitely already paid my rent. Otherwise, I probably would have been evicted by now. My telephone and cellular bill was already paid as well. My paychecks and wages already came in, and there's actually another one that's ready to come in as well, but I haven't recorded that one yet, so that's why this one appears as an empty diamond. And then now the actual amounts and the envelope amounts were updated as well. So you'll notice that the $500 has actually been applied to the actual amount in rent, and the same with the telephone cellular, $100. And the envelope amounts were updated accordingly as well. So now we're going to want to make sure that since we have this extra money in this income envelope, we're going to want to make sure that we set aside some extra money for the outstanding envelopes that have already been paid. So what this is going to allow me to do, and this part right here is optional, but what this is going to allow me to do is it's just basically earmarking these funds. You'll see that the $600 has been taken away and put into these two envelopes. It's basically earmarking these funds for the first of next month. So once the first comes, I'll know I have enough money set aside for these items, so then I'll be good to go at that point. Now, here's where the credit card debt payment and the credit card payment balancer categories come into play. And I'm going to show you how to track these transactions manually, as well as how to use a scheduled transaction. Manual is going to be first. So why don't we move towards the checking account right now? So let's say I log into my Citibank or Citi credit card account, and I just paid my bill. So let's record that for today's date. So 12/18, let's say Citi credit card payment. Normally, you would want to use a linked transfer transaction. And what that is basically, and this is what we're going to do now, but normally you would only have to use a link transfer transaction. And I'll show you what this looks like right now. So you'll notice that the credit card account, the name of it is Joe's credit card. So to make it a linked transfer transaction, I'm just going to enter the name of the account that I want to transfer it to right into the category field. Once that autofill suggestion is selected, just go ahead and press tab. It's going to be a linked transfer transaction to that account. So we're going to want to pay down $300 because again, we're getting aggressive on this pay down. So everything looks good now. Why don't we go ahead and save this transaction? So you'll see 12/18/17 credit card payment going to Joe's credit card account in the amount of $300. And if you'll see this arrow here next to the category field, that basically means that it's a transfer transaction. So if I actually click on this, it'll take me right to the transfer transaction in the corresponding account. You'll notice now that this arrow is pointing away from the checking account category. So that's basically meaning the credit or the amount is coming from the checking account and going towards the credit card account. And then the mirrored side is going to the credit card account. So the arrow really indicates where the money is going to or coming from. But now let's go to the budget. Let's see if this appears in the budget. It doesn't. You'll see the CC debt payment, and obviously it's been unaffected. There's no record essentially of that transaction within the budget. And this is because these are linked transfer transactions. So if both accounts are included in the budget, then this $300 going into the credit card account and this $300 going out of the checking account, or vice versa, those basically wash each other out, and then they prevent any amount from appearing in the budget. This is why we had to create those extra categories. Normally, if let's say if it was a credit card account that you closed or you're no longer using, you could just exclude the credit card account from the budget, and then those transfer transactions will appear in the budget because the credit card account was excluded. But because they're both included, the $300 coming out of the checking and the $300 going into the credit card account, they wash each other out and they won't appear at all. So again, this is where the extra categories come in. So we're going to go ahead and edit the transaction, and we're going to split it. We're going to want to make sure that the split balancer, this little blue dot, we want to make sure that it appears at the top amount, next to the top expense amount. Now we're going to do credit card, CC debt payment. That's the category we're using to track the payment of the credit card debt. And again, just another $300 right into the expense field. And you'll notice here that the amount goes up to $600. Obviously, that is not how much we paid the bill for, so we don't want that to be reflected in the budget. This is where the CC payment balancer category comes in. Instead of entering it again into the expense field, obviously that would bring it up to $900. We're just going to add it to the income field here. And again, this is just to balance this payment transaction. So once we hit save, boom, we'll see that this $300 is still a $300 withdrawal. There's really no change to the transaction amount. This is what we want to see in these accounts. You'll see it gets recorded in the same way on the opposing side. Checking, debt payment, CC payment balancer, and everything looks good. The balance is correct, and then we see that the balance goes down by $300, which is what we want to see. And now let's move over to the budget. Now we can see the CC debt payment has actually been recorded. We'll see that this bar is filled in with red. That basically just means that we're set to be over budget for this item. But since there's only really one transaction for this item, as you get closer to the end of the month, the red will sort of turn into yellow, and then the last of the month it'll be green, and then on the first of the month next month it'll be blank again. But this is basically just a percentage of the amount according to today. So now the envelope amount is back down to 0, and that's because the actual amount is up to $300. So we had that $300 transaction. We went ahead and paid the bill. We went a little aggressive on it, paid it $100 more than what we had to. So now our envelope amount is down to 0. Let's go ahead and try to fill this envelope with the remaining with some of the remaining funds left. So this will basically allow us to make sure that we're on track for next month. So we already have this $300 set aside ready to go for when that transaction is applied next month. And then this leaves us with an extra $100 in the groceries envelope. So why don't we let's say so we went to Trader Joe's. Let's say that we went to Trader Joe's last night. We bought some groceries. So on the 17th, we went to Trader Joe's, and then this is why we're including the account or the credit card account in the budget, because you really can't budget for an active credit card account while it's excluded from the budget. So this is why we include it, obviously. And we're just going to do groceries as the category. Let's say it was $78. Actually, let's make it a nice even 80. So let's say it was $80 that we went to Trader Joe's last night. So we're going to go back to the budget, and we're going to see that the groceries is accurately being recorded. We have the groceries going in at this amount. This basically is 80%, or excuse me, this is basically the $80, which represents the percentage of this full expected amount. So pretend that this bar, this full bar here, is equal to $400, which is the budgeted amount that you'll see right here. So this bar is equal to $400. This is $80 of that 400. So that's basically just why it shows there within the budget. And then this is why we kept the card active, remember. So now we have this extra $100 in the income envelope. Rent is already set aside for next month. Telephone and cellular set aside for next month. I did some grocery shopping, not going to have to do much more for the rest of the month. So we can actually leave that now if you want, or you can add the extra $100 into the budget or into the envelope for groceries if you would prefer. But that's really up to you. As long as you have your highest priority envelopes covered, then you should be in good shape. So at this time, I'm going to sort of leave this screen on the screen right now, or leave this window on the screen, and I'm going to sort of take a moment to see if any of you have any questions on this process up till now. There's not much more content in this presentation, just a few more reviews, but I want to make sure that everything that I've done up to this point is sort of understood. And if not, then please tell me, and I'll go through and check to make sure that that I was clear in my explanation for the certain processes. But I'll just take a moment, let you all think of some questions if there are any, and if any come up, I'll be happy to address them. But if I don't see anything, I'll just switch back to the presentation and we'll continue on there. But I do know this is kind of a lot to take in all at once, especially if you're new to envelope budgeting in general. So we are recording this session. If you do need a link, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to email you a link so you can rewatch the webinar again. All right, I'm not seeing any new questions coming in. Oh, actually, I just saw one, Ben. Ben says, can this method be used for a car loan account? Yeah, it can, Ben. But you shouldn't really need to do this method for car loans. And the reason for that is because there typically aren't really other transactions active in loan accounts besides the payments from the payment accounts. For instance, most often it's done from a checking account. So in those cases, you can just use linked transfer transactions, and then split the mortgage payment or the car loan payment accordingly. So let's say you'd have a split for principal, you'd have a split for the interest. Basically, the principal amount would just be the transaction amount that you're paying down the bill by. So in those cases, you would really only need to exclude the loan account from the budget in order to effectively track those payments in the budget. You wouldn't need to do the payment balancer category. You can really just exclude the account from the budget. So then you can actually budget for those payments, because there aren't really active transactions in loan accounts other than the payments. So you shouldn't really need to jump through all these hoops just to track the loan account payments. But I hope that helps, Ben. And the actual tracking loan accounts is actually covered in good detail in the user manual as well as the Banktivity help menu. So let's search for track loans. You go to tracking loans, just right down here from in the help menu. And then it'll bring up some help menu information regarding setting up loan accounts. And then there'll even be some help information towards the bottom. For instance, if you plan to set up a budget, you should also check scheduled interest and fees separately. This will just allow you to track these items sort of separately, and then you just exclude the account from the budget. All right, you're welcome, Ben. Thanks for the great question. That was wonderful. C asks, off topic at the very end, could you refer me to an online setup for banking? I pay bills online rather than, I pay bills online via another piece of software from which I am switching to Banktivity. I'm using this other software to already pay bills. Do I need to do something else to pay bills with Banktivity? How do I complete this process? So you can continue paying your bills online if you would prefer, C, but there is actually a bill payment feature in Banktivity. However, in order to use this bill payment feature in Banktivity, your bank must support OFX services and specifically third-party bill pay services. Not all banks provide this service, unfortunately, but for detailed information on this process and what it would require in Banktivity, just go ahead, go to the help menu, search for bill pay, and then you just go to the online bill pay, and you can click on that. But also be sure to read more about the direct download method, because again, in order to use bill pay, your accounts must support OFX services, which is known as like the direct download method in Banktivity, as well as third-party bill pay. So the account must first be set up for direct download / bill pay in Banktivity. Otherwise, bill pay will not work for that account, unfortunately. So go ahead, click on direct download, get a little bit more information on this download method. Like it says at the top here, also known as OFX or Direct Connect. It's basically a download feature that allows you to connect to your bank automatically. And then you can, there should be some more information regarding bill pay towards the bottom. But if you don't see it, just go ahead, go to the help menu and then search for, got to be in Banktivity in order to do this. Search for bill pay and then just click on online bill pay. There's a lot of great information in here, how to set it up, how to ask your bank if they support it, how to use it, how to set up payment, or excuse me, how to set up payees and edit details, etc. So if your bank supports third-party bill pay services, you should be in good shape. C says, where can I go to for additional questions on bill paying? You can go to the help menu that I just provided, or you can join our live chat team. We provide support 7 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. Saturday, Sunday, it is 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'd be happy to help you out if you run into any issues, run into any errors or anything like that. And then you also ask, see, you say, isn't that what Quicken uses? And I think you are referring to the Direct Connect or OFX services, and you're absolutely correct. That is what Quicken uses. It's a standard connection protocol. Open Financial Exchange is what OFX stands for, and it just allows users to connect with their banks. MS Money uses it as well. There's also a few other financial applications that use this connection method. But again, Quicken and Banktivity use the same OFX protocols. So if the bank supports specifically Direct Connect through Quicken, then Banktivity's direct download / bill pay method should be supported as well. But those are some great questions. Thank you, C. C says, so if Quicken uses that and I used Quicken, shouldn't I be able to automatically use it? Yes, but here's the thing. Quicken also uses a couple other download methods, or I think one other download method called Express Web Connect, which is not the same as Direct Connect. So if you use Direct Connect in Quicken, then you should be able to go ahead and use Quicken, or excuse me, you should be able to go ahead and use Banktivity's direct download / bill pay method. But if you're using Express Web Connect, that is not the same thing as Direct Connect. So there is a difference, and Direct Connect, or excuse me, Express Web Connect does not support bill pay, and it is not the same as OFX services. You're very welcome, C. No problem. Thank you for the great questions. I'm sure others had the same or similar ones as well. making sure I didn't miss any other questions. Just going to toggle back to the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about some review topics just so we can get these refreshed and keep them fresh on our brain. So first thing you want to do is get organized. Write down all your write down all your credit card accounts, write down all their balances, write down all their interest rates. Add those accounts to Banktivity. Make sure all the transactions are clean and categorized. Again, categories play a huge part in making sure that Banktivity's data is valid and correct. So make sure that your transactions are properly categorized and nice and clean, and this will save you so much time. Freeze your spending whenever possible. This is important because you don't want to add to the debt that you're already paying. I won't touch too much upon this topic. Obviously, it goes without saying. But then lastly, pick a strategy and stick to it, and then rinse and repeat. So what that means is you want to pick the debt snowball method, or you want to pick the debt avalanche method, or maybe even a hybrid of the two if you have the cash flow. But it's really best to pick one or the other and then just stick to it. The snowball method tends to be the most user-friendly method, just because it really helps to sort of get some of the smaller debts out of the way, so you can really move forward on those bigger debts, and you really start to melt those away, and it's pretty rewarding. And then again, rinse and repeat. Just every time you get paid, distribute funds into your expense envelopes, and excuse me. Yeah, so just rinse and repeat. All right, checking for some other questions. It's gonna save some time for some Q&A in case anybody else has some questions. Again, I know this might be a lot to take in, so if there's anything else you need from me after the webinar, maybe a recording of the webinar, please feel free to contact me. You can use this link, or excuse me, you can use this email address in the background, webinars@iggsoftware.com. That's an inbox that I personally manage, so just say, hey, Joe, I was a little confused about X, Y, and Z. Could you clear it up for me, or could you point me in the direction for some more information? I'd be happy to help out anybody who needs anything else. I'm going to leave the window open for a few minutes just so we can sort of take time and write down the email address if needed. Also, just in case that some of you are writing up some questions, I don't want to close out on you for obvious reasons. But I do appreciate everyone's time today. It's kind of a very information-heavy webinar, especially if you're not terribly familiar with the webinar, or excuse me, with the envelope budgeting feature. I'm not seeing any new questions coming in. I'm going to give it another minute or two. It also looks like we're losing a few of the attendees. They're filing out. So if anything else comes up, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'd be happy to help you out. I'm going to go through right now and just read the questions list, make sure I got to everybody. C says, thanks for a great session. As a 25-year user of Quicken, I am happy to have a great alternative. Thank you so much, C. We appreciate the kind words. If you have any questions or even suggestions for future topics, or something you might want to see in a future topic for a webinar, please contact me directly, and because I manage most of the webinar content myself, so I'd be happy to obviously I'll take your feedback, happy to take your feedback, but I'd happy to try to sort of work with you to see if there's any other topics that you might find useful or helpful for future webinar discussions. But yeah, have a great rest of your day. I thank you all for the great questions. If anything comes up, please let us know. We'd be happy to assist you. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Enjoy, and have a happy holiday season if I don't hear from you. Bye-bye now.